Have you seen their car? That's what Elon Musk said in 2011, laughing off a question about a Chinese company nobody in America had heard of. He wasn't just dismissive, he was almost offended by the idea that this company could ever be a threat to Tesla. 15 years later, that company builds more electric cars than Tesla does. It builds its own batteries, its own chips, its own charging stations, and it just told the world it plans to become the single largest car company on the planet within 5 years. Not the largest EV maker, the largest car company. Period. Bigger than Toyota. This is the story of how Tesla went from mocking a competitor to fearing it. And the scary part for Tesla is that this isn't a story with an ending yet. It's still happening in real time in 2026. Let's rewind. In 2008, when BYD was still mostly known for making rechargeable batteries and cell phone parts, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway bought a 10% stake in the company. Buffett doesn't buy hype. He buys boring, profitable businesses. So when Berkshire backed a Chinese battery maker that had just started dabbling in cars, most of Wall Street shrugged it off as a rounding error investment. Tesla, at the time, was busy trying to survive. The Roadster had launched, the Model S was still years away, and Musk was reportedly sleeping on the factory floor, trying to keep the company from going bankrupt. BYD wasn't on anyone's radar as a rival. It was a battery supplier that also happened to make cheap, forgettable cars for the Chinese domestic market. That's the context for the 2011 interview. A reporter asked Musk directly if BYD posed any competitive threat to Tesla. His answer? More or less, their cars aren't attractive, the technology isn't strong, and no, he wasn't worried. It's the kind of quote that ages either perfectly or catastrophically. There is no in-between. We now know which one it was. For most of the 2000s and 10s, Musk's dismissal looked correct. Tesla was inventing the modern EV playbook, over-the-air updates, a supercharger network nobody else had, a brand that made electric cars feel aspirational instead of punishing. BYD, meanwhile, was grinding away in China, selling buses, taxis, and cheap sedans that Western media barely covered. But underneath the radar, BYD was doing something Tesla wasn't. It was building the entire supply chain in-house. Batteries, semiconductors, electric motors, even the ships used to export its cars overseas. While most automakers, including Tesla, depended on outside battery suppliers like Panasonic or CATL, BYD controlled its own battery chemistry from raw materials to finished pack. That vertical integration is the single most important detail in this entire story. So remember it, because it's the reason for almost everything that happens next. By 2020, BYD had launched something called the Blade battery, a lithium iron phosphate battery pack that was cheaper to produce, safer in crash and puncture testing, and didn't rely on expensive nickel or cobalt. Cheaper batteries meant cheaper cars. Cheaper cars meant volume. And volume is exactly what turns a regional player into a global one. Then came the moment nobody in Detroit or Fremont was ready for. In the fourth quarter of 2023, BYD outsold Tesla in battery electric vehicles for a full quarter for the first time ever. Tesla still won the full calendar year, barely, but the message was unmistakable. The gap had closed to zero, and it was closing from BYD's side. A month later, on a Tesla earnings call in January 2024, Musk said something that sounded very different from 2011. Asked about Chinese competitors, he warned that without strong trade barriers, Chinese automakers would, in his words, pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world. Read that sentence again. The same man who laughed off BYD as unattractive and technologically weak was now telling his own investors that Chinese EV makers could wipe out the global auto industry. That's not a rival anymore. That's a 5-alarm fire, and Musk lit the match himself, live, on a public earnings call. 2024 ended with Tesla narrowly ahead in raw vehicle sales, but BYD had already become the bigger company by revenue and by total production. And BYD wasn't just competing on price anymore. It was launching new hybrid powertrains capable of over 1,300 miles of combined range, a number that made Toyota's decades of hybrid dominance look outdated overnight. It was expanding into Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, and in China itself, it had overtaken every legacy Western brand, including Volkswagen, as the single best-selling car company in the country. Now, here's where the story stops being about BYD's rise and starts being about Tesla's fall. Because in 2025, two things happened to Tesla at exactly the same time, and together they turned a competitive threat into an existential one. The first was political. Musk had spent hundreds of millions of dollars helping elect Donald Trump, then took on a prominent advisory role, slashing federal agencies. In Europe, where Tesla's customer base had always skewed environmentally conscious and politically progressive, that alliance detonated the brand. Protests hit Tesla dealerships, vandalism hit Tesla showrooms, and the sales numbers followed the outrage almost month for month. European registrations fell for 13 consecutive months. Germany, once Tesla's largest European market, collapsed by nearly half in a single year. By early 2026, Tesla's entire market share across the EU, UK, and neighboring countries had shrunk to under 1%. The second factor was product stagnation. While this was happening, Tesla's lineup barely changed. The Model Y and Model 3 got minor refreshes. The long-promised affordable model kept slipping. The Cybertruck, once hyped as a revolution, underdelivered on sales and saw its resale value crater. Meanwhile, BYD launched an entirely new high-voltage charging platform, new luxury sub-brands, and new models every few months, at a pace no Western automaker could match. Put those two forces together, a self-inflicted brand crisis, plus a rival that never stopped shipping new technology, and you get a full-blown collapse. For all of 2025, Tesla's global deliveries fell 9% to about 1.64 million vehicles. BYD sold 2.26 million fully electric vehicles that year. And when you add in its plug-in hybrids, its total energy vehicle sales topped 4.6 million. Tesla's annual profit didn't just dip, it fell 46% year over year, down to its lowest level in years. For a company that spent a decade promising 50% annual growth, that's not a slowdown. That's a reversal of the entire narrative Tesla was built on. For the first time since the two companies started being compared, BYD didn't just beat Tesla in one metric. It beat Tesla in nearly all of them: production, EV sales, hybrid sales, revenue growth, and international expansion. Everywhere except the United States, where tariffs still keep BYD off American roads entirely. That last point matters more than it sounds. Tesla's home market advantage isn't really an advantage. It's a wall built by trade policy. Take that wall down, and multiple industry analysts, along with Musk himself, have said Chinese automakers would flood in and undercut Tesla immediately. The only reason BYD hasn't already started eating Tesla's US market share is that it's currently illegal for it to try. Now, before we go further, if you're the kind of person who wants the real story behind the headlines instead of press releases dressed up as news, that's exactly what this channel does every week. Hit subscribe now, because the next part of this story gets even messier, and you don't want to miss where it goes. So let's talk about the technology gap, because this is where things get genuinely uncomfortable for Tesla. In early 2026, BYD rolled out something called the Super E platform, alongside a next-generation Blade battery. The pitch was simple and almost unbelievable. Charge an EV from 10 to 70% in about 5 minutes, adding roughly 250 miles of range in the time it takes to use a restroom and grab a coffee. That's not an improvement over Tesla's supercharger network. That's a different category of technology entirely, roughly 3 to 5 times more powerful than the fastest chargers commonly available in the West. Independent journalists who traveled to China to test it confirmed the numbers were real, not marketing fluff. And BYD isn't keeping this exclusive to six-figure flagship cars. It's rolling this same charging tech down into mass-market models that start under $20,000 overseas and under $10,000 in China. Compare that to Tesla's cheapest vehicle, which still starts north of $35,000 in the US, even after Tesla stripped it down to compete. BYD isn't just matching Tesla's technology at a lower price. In fast charging speed, it's now ahead at a fraction of the cost. Then there's the global expansion piece, which is where BYD's ambitions stop looking like a China story and start looking like a world domination story. BYD now has manufacturing plants either running or under construction in Thailand, Brazil, Indonesia, Uzbekistan, and Hungary, with more sites reportedly being scouted in Spain. The Hungary plant matters most because it's BYD's first passenger car factory inside the European Union, meaning it can build cars locally and sidestep the tariffs designed to keep Chinese EVs out. In the first 4 months of 2026 alone, BYD's market share across the EU nearly tripled. In the UK specifically, BYD has already passed Renault, Volvo, and yes, Tesla. In June 2026, BYD's chairman stood in front of nearly 1,000 shareholders and said the company intends to become the world's largest automaker, full stop, within 5 years. Not the largest EV maker, the largest automaker on Earth, ahead of Toyota, ahead of Volkswagen, ahead of everyone. So what is Tesla actually doing about all of this? Betting the entire company on a pivot away from cars altogether. Tesla is racing to scale up its robotaxi service and its Optimus humanoid robot, essentially arguing that the future of the company isn't selling more vehicles, it's autonomous ride-hailing and robotic labor. In 2026, Tesla went as far as discontinuing its flagship Model S and Model X, ending a 14-year production run, specifically to free up factory floor space for Optimus. That's an extraordinary decision. Tesla is quite literally shutting down car production lines to make room for robots that, as of this year, still can't reliably do useful work at scale, and whose reveal event has already been delayed multiple times. Even Tesla's own CEO has admitted the production timeline is, quote, impossible to predict. Meanwhile, the cybercab robotaxi still hasn't received full regulatory approval for driverless operation in most markets, and paid robotaxi rides remain limited to a handful of Texas cities. This is the strategic bet Tesla is making. Skip past the car war it's losing and leapfrog straight into robotics and autonomy, where it hopes Chinese competitors haven't caught up yet. It's a bold move. It might even work, but it's also undeniably an admission. You don't pivot away from your core business unless you've concluded you can't win the fight you're currently in. And here's the twist that makes this story genuinely unresolved instead of a clean underdog narrative. In the first quarter of 2026, Tesla actually reclaimed the global EV sales crown, beating BYD by roughly 48,000 units. Why? Because China removed a purchase tax exemption on electric vehicles, and BYD's domestic sales dropped more than 25% as Chinese buyers delayed purchases to dodge the new tax. It wasn't Tesla getting stronger, it was BYD getting hit by its own government's policy shift. That lead didn't last. By the second quarter of 2026, BYD was back on top. And across the first half of the year combined, BYD's battery electric sales edged back ahead of Tesla's. The two companies are now locked in a genuine seesaw battle, trading the lead almost every single quarter. That's not a story about one company crushing another. That's a story about a company that used to have no real rival, now fighting for its position every 90 days against an opponent it once considered a joke. Even Ford's CEO has publicly said that if Americans want to beat China in the car business, Tesla isn't necessarily the company to watch. BYD is, because of its cost structure, its supply chain, and its manufacturing IP. When your own American competitors are pointing at the Chinese company instead of you as the real benchmark, that tells you everything about how far the fear has spread. So when exactly did Tesla start fearing BYD? It wasn't one single day. It was a slow unraveling of a joke that Musk told in 2011, one quarter at a time, until the man who once asked, "Have you seen their car?" was the same man warning the world that Chinese automakers could demolish the entire industry. The irony is almost too perfect. Warren Buffett, the most boring investor on the planet, spotted this in 2008. Elon Musk, the most confident man in tech, missed it for over a decade. And by the time he saw it clearly, the company he'd dismissed was already bigger than his. This war isn't over. It's not even close to over. Every quarter now decides who's actually winning, and neither company can afford to blink. So here's my question for you. Does Tesla actually win this by out-innovating BYD in robotics and autonomy? Or is this the beginning of a slow, permanent decline for the company that invented the modern EV? Drop your take in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know if you think Musk's bet on robots pays off before BYD eats what's left of Tesla's global market. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Tesla once laughed off BYD as a non-threat. In 2026, BYD builds more EVs than Tesla, charges cars in 5 minutes, undercuts Tesla on price everywhere, and just announced plans to become the world's largest automaker within 5 years. This is the full story of how Tesla went from mocking a Chinese battery company to fighting for survival against it, the sales collapse, the brand crisis, the technology gap, and the desperate pivot to robots and robotaxis that might be Tesla's only way out. A deep dive into the Tesla versus BYD rivalry, 2011 to 2026, told through sales data, earnings calls, and the technology race neither company can afford to lose. Subscribe for sharp, no-fluff breakdowns of the biggest stories in tech and business. Let me know in the comments, does Tesla win this with robots, or is BYD's lead permanent?